Dr. Alex Fox. I was born on March 13th, 1918 in New York City. And my family and I moved to Springfield, Massachusetts when I was about 8. I went through the local schools, through high school, and of course during the Depression, when I got out in 34, did not immediately go to college, but worked for 2 years. Then went on from Springfield College to the University of Massachusetts, and then on to Northwestern University, Chicago, where I obtained my dental degree, and from where I graduated in 1942. At that point, of course, I had been commissioned as an officer in the United States Navy, and I went on active duty as a dental officer on October the 1st of 1942. Would have been earlier, except the clinics weren't ready. We were in a terrible mess at that particular time as far as being able to absorb the number of incoming recruits. My first station was at Newport, Rhode Island, and that dental clinic that we had was running and did run from 7 in the morning till 10 at night, two shifts a day, 7 days a week, because the boot training, which normally is 16 weeks, was down to a mere 4 weeks, at which time we had to do all of the necessary treatment for these youngsters who were going to be sent out around the world. And so, on average, we would treat one youngster, sometimes 2 a day, because they were in such desperate dental shape, especially here in the Northeast. We did not have fluoride in the drinking water in those days, and most of these kids, having grown up in the Depression, diets were not great, and certainly they were not treated dentally adequately, so their first actual dental care came to them when they joined the service. I spent about 6 or 7 months at Newport, Rhode Island, treating these youngsters. And from there, I was assigned to go to Virginia to join a CB battalion. And in those days, they were forming them down at Camp Magruder in Virginia. And then we were assigned to a CB battalion, and I became the dental officer for that unit. We traveled from there up to Davisville, Rhode Island for a short period of training, from there out to the West Coast, and then finally to Eniwetok in the Marshall Islands. And our unit was stationed at one end of this 20-mile lagoon, and at the opposite end, which was the larger base with a larger airfield, was also existent. And our job, the officers and the CBs were there to build an airfield and also to make recreational facilities for what they were going to be doing shortly afterwards when they were assembling the fleet at that wonderful atoll, which is about 20 miles across, for the forward invasions of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. And so we spent several months at Eniwetok, and I served for the dental group of my own, and we were in pretty good shape, and I was asked to spend a month at another one of the smaller islands in the atoll, taking care of another group who were not well treated dentally. And from there, after we were ordered back to Hawaii. We got back to Honolulu, Hawaii, and I felt that I'd had enough of that kind of duty, and I personally requested that I be assigned to sea duty. And my request was granted, and I didn't know what I was going on. I didn't know where I was going. And in those days, all you did was you reported every day and said, "I'm here," and they'd say, "Not today." A nice little Japanese lady was the one who was doing this. And so finally, after a week and a half or so, she said, "Yep, today you go." So I got on a ship, and of course I headed out to the Pacific, further into the Pacific, and joined the 3rd and 5th Fleet, which was operating out there, and I was assigned to the USS Langley, which is a smaller carrier, but it was named for the original aircraft carrier, and I spent the rest of the war on that ship. We never saw land. We operated 3 days out of 4, and on the 4th day we would pull back to meet a supply train, which would provide us with any food, fuel, ammunition, and even airplanes that we lost. And the fleet would change command. It was called the 3rd Fleet, it was called the 5th Fleet. There was an Admiral Nimitz and an Admiral Halsey who were the leaders of those groups, but they were actually the same 4 groups that were out there operating. And of course, I saw a total difference since I was a dental officer, interestingly enough, in the fact that the sailors who I treated aboard the ship, many of whom came from the southwest of this country and who lived in areas where they had indigenous fluoridation in the water, and their dental conditions were far superior to that which I saw in Newport, Rhode Island, where the sailors had come from the New England states, which were not able to have the benefits of fluoridation at that time. And so there was a difference. And the routine aboard ship was you got up an hour before sunup and went to battle stations. We all, of course, had battle stations. Fortunately, during the time that I was aboard, the ship was not injured, but prior to the time that I came aboard, the ship had been hit and had a hole in it, which was just being patched when I came aboard. And so our duty was to stay at battle stations while we launched aircraft, and then finally, of course, we were released to do our daily things aboard the ship. And the ship itself did a magnificent job. And toward the end of the war, when, of course, we became a little bit complacent, we were in a place called Ulithi, and we were showing movies on the flight deck. Of course, normally we kept running without lights, and suddenly heard some strange aircraft, 2 kamikazes. One attempted to hit us, but luckily landed in the water, and the ship next to us, another aircraft carrier, was hit on the fantail and killed a few people. At that point, we were pretty well bummed out, you might say, from the amount of time the ship had spent at sea, and we were ordered back to the United States. Excuse me. And we escorted the other carrier back. Then we were in the States for a couple of weeks for refitting and went right back out. By that time, I had had my 1.5 years. There was a 1.5 years service period that you were required to spend in the Pacific or on active duty. And however, my relief never showed up in time. So I went back out to Hawaii, and at that point, while we were in Hawaii for the second time, armistice was declared. The Japanese had surrendered, and so I saw that wonderful demonstration in Honolulu of the joy that occurred then. I was assigned back in the United States for a short period of time at Boston at the so-called Fargo building, which was again a receiving station. And finally, at the end of December, having had more than enough points for discharge, I left the service. And that, of course, is what my service consisted of. But aboard the aircraft carrier, during battle, we were, of course, always at stations, and our ship received a Navy commendation for the work that was done by our aviators and by the ship itself. So no thanks to me, but at least I do hold that one medal. Upon my release to inactive duty, and since I knew that I was going to be getting out, and of course my family was living in Springfield at the time, and that is where I intended to practice my profession. And so I had begun to make arrangements to rent space as well as to purchase equipment, which was not easy to get in those days. But nevertheless, I established a practice in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I practiced in Springfield, Massachusetts for 49 years before I finally retired. And now, as a matter of fact, my son has taken over that office, and he had been with me for 8 years prior to that time. For the first several years of my practice, I associated with a Dr. Fitzgibbon on a part-time basis in Holyoke, Massachusetts. But unlike, of course, many of the people who served and then had to go out and find a job or get schooling, I had already had mine, and I was going to do the thing which, of course, for which I had been educated, and that's what I spent my life doing. Since then, for some 30 years now, I have lived in Long Meadow with my second wife, and that is the sort of thing that one does if you're in a profession, rather than to go seeking a job. Or of course, I'd had my schooling. I could have gone into other things, but I certainly wanted to stay with what I knew. And I've had the good fortune of treating many, many people in this area, both Springfield, Long Meadow, and in the surrounding towns, in the profession of dentistry. And knowing what I do about dental problems, I'm a strong advocate of fluoridation of public water supplies, which fortunately we have here in Long Meadow, and hopefully will continue to have. And it's a sad commentary on the fact that Springfield, where we attempted to do this years and years ago, they have never been able to provide that wonderful benefit to the citizens of Springfield. And I would strongly recommend it. Thank you.